July 1943. The Sicilian sun is a white-hot hammer beating down on the limestone ridges of Troina. It is 40 degrees Celsius, and the air is thick with the stench of rotting mules and cordite. Amidst the chaos of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division's advance, a high-ranking SS liaison officer, attached to the Hermann Göring Division, is brought into a field clearing. His leg has been shattered by a .50 caliber round. He is gray-faced, losing consciousness, and surrounded by dust-covered GIs. As an American Army doctor prepares a direct transfusion, the Nazi's eyes snap open. He doesn't see a savior. He sees a biological threat. With a voice like dry parchment, he declares that the blood of a mongrel nation will not contaminate his pedigree. He would rather perish in the Sicilian dust than live with the taint of American plasma. This was a calculated insult to every man in the clearing. These were soldiers who had bled from North Africa to Gela, and now, a man they had defeated was claiming their very life force was poison. The tension is broken by the roar of a command car. General George S. Patton, Jr. emerges, covered in a thick layer of yellow dust. He doesn't wait for a report. He walks straight to the wounded German, looking down at the officer's pristine, though bloodied, SS runes. Patton wasn't looking at a patient. He was looking at an obstacle to the total mental collapse of the Wehrmacht. He knew that if this officer died a heroic death of refusal, he would become a legend to his men. Patton had to ensure that didn't happen. To understand the gravity of this moment, one must understand the environment of the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one, during the bloody push toward Troina. The dust was so pervasive it jammed the actions of M1 Garands and turned sweat into a gritty paste. The American Medical Corps was operating at a breaking point, dealing not only with combat wounds, but with a massive outbreak of malaria that was thinning the ranks faster than German MG-42s. Every drop of blood and plasma was a miracle of logistics, shipped across the Atlantic and trucked through the bombed-out ruins of Gela. For an enemy officer to treat this precious resource with contempt wasn't just a personal choice. It was a psychological weapon. Patton's understanding of the enemy was unique among Allied generals. While Bradley saw numbers and Montgomery saw maps, Patton saw ancient ghosts. He believed he had fought the Germanic tribes in a past life, and he recognized the fanaticism in the officer's eyes. To the SS, blood wasn't just a liquid. It was a mystical carrier of destiny, a Blut und Boden theology that dictated who deserved to breathe. By refusing the transfusion, the German was attempting a final act of spiritual warfare, trying to claim a moral victory in the middle of a physical rout. Patton took off his goggles, his blue eyes cold and calculating, fixed on the silver death's head on the officer's cap. This wasn't just a medical refusal. It was a tactical maneuver designed to humiliate American values. Patton turned to the doctor, a young man from Brooklyn who was visibly shaken. Patton knew that if he forced the transfusion, the officer would play the martyr, claiming he was violated by inferior blood. But Patton was a master of the cruel alternative. He realized that the Nazis' strength came from a sheltered sense of superiority. He decided to strip that shelter away. He looked at the officer and said, "Colonel, you believe your blood is a sacred river of the Reich. I think it's just a leaking tap that needs to be turned off." This was the moment Patton moved beyond the Geneva Convention and into the realm of the soul. He wasn't interested in saving the man's body yet. He wanted to witness the moment the man's God failed him. Patton issued his directive with a chilling calmness. "Move the medical screen. Let the sun look at him." The GIs, confused but obedient, moved the canvas shading that had provided a few degrees of relief from the 100-degree Sicilian heat. Now, the SS officer was exposed to the brutal, unrelenting glare of the Mediterranean sky. The heat here was a physical weight, a shimmering curtain of fire that sucked the moisture out of a man in minutes. Within a short time, the officer's skin, already pale from blood loss, began to turn a violent shade of red. The flies, drawn by the copper scent of his mangled leg, began to swarm in a black, buzzing cloud. This was the reality Patton wanted him to face. There was no Valhalla waiting in the Sicilian dust, no Wagnerian orchestra to carry his soul to the halls of his ancestors. There was only the slow, agonizing, and very unheroic evaporation of a human being in a ditch. This wasn't an act of torture. It was a forced confrontation with nature, stripped of the Nazi theater. Patton knew that the Nazi ideology relied on aesthetics, grand rallies, polished boots, and controlled environments. Out here, in the raw, indifferent heat of Sicily, the theater was gone. The officer was no longer a representative of a 1,000-year Reich. He was a biological organism failing in real time. Patton sat on the fender of his command car, cleaning his fingernails with a small knife, seemingly indifferent. He knew the psychology of the master race was brittle. It was a philosophy that worked only when they were winning or when they were being observed as heroes. Patton deprived him of both. He forbade the medics from speaking to the prisoner. He forbade anyone from giving him a drop of water. He wanted the officer to feel the absolute silence of the universe in the face of his purity. Patton famously remarked in his personal notes that the Hun is a bully who cannot stand the silence of his own defeat. As the officer's breathing became shallow and rapid, the classic signs of hypovolemic shock, the GIs watched in a mixture of horror and fascination. They realized Patton wasn't waiting for the man to die. He was waiting for the myth to evaporate. He was testing the boiling point of fanatical belief, and as the temperature rose, that boiling point was approaching fast. The breaking point came after nearly 30 minutes of exposure. The sound of the battle for Troina and the rattle of heavy machine guns seemed like a world away. Here, in this small clearing, the only sound was the officer's ragged, dry gasping. Patton began to talk loudly to his staff about the evening's rations, about the quality of the local Sicilian lemons, and the strategic importance of capturing Messina before Montgomery's Eighth Army. He treated the dying Obersturmbannführer as if he were a piece of discarded, rusting equipment left behind by a retreating army. This was the ultimate psychological decapitation, to be ignored as irrelevant by the man who was currently destroying your entire world. The officer's hand, claw-like and trembling, suddenly twitched toward the medical kit. The master was beginning to realize that his racial purity was not providing him with oxygen or blood volume. He looked at the plasma bags hanging near other wounded men, Italians and Americans alike, and saw the simple, undeniable truth that blood was life, and without it, he was just meat rotting in the sun. He managed to croak out a single desperate word: Wasser, water. Then, with a look of absolute defeat that seemed to age him 20 years in a second, he whispered, blood, blood. Patton stood up, walked over, and looked him in the eye. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered a mirror. I thought American blood was poison, Colonel. I thought it was a mongrel's cocktail. Why would a noble Aryan want to live as a mixture? The officer could only stare back, his lips cracked and bleeding, his pride completely liquidated by the sheer biological necessity of survival. This wasn't just a change of mind. It was a total collapse of a worldview. Patton signaled the doctors, but with a specific instruction that echoed through the camp. Give him the transfusion, but make sure he knows it comes from the men he despises. I want him to know that every heartbeat he has from now on is a gift from the very people he deemed unfit to exist. This wasn't just a medical save. It was a permanent branding of the soul. The officer would live, but he would live as a living contradiction to everything he had ever fought for. The officer survived, but the fanatical edge was gone. During his interrogation, he provided detailed intelligence on the defensive positions around Mount Etna, data that saved hundreds of American lives. The myth of his superiority had been burned away by the Sicilian sun, replaced by the cold reality of American pragmatism. This incident solidified Patton's reputation as a commander who understood that the most important terrain in war is the 6 inches between the enemy's ears. Patton wrote in his diary that night, "The German is a slave to his own arrogance. Once you show him that his gods are silent, he becomes the most obedient prisoner you could ask for. He doesn't just surrender his gun, he surrenders his mind." This remains a hidden chapter of the Sicilian campaign, a reminder that Patton didn't just fight a war of tanks, he fought a war of wills. He knew that to win, you must not only defeat the soldier, but destroy the idea that makes him one. In the end, the blood that saved the SS officer proved that no ideology can survive the direct heat of reality. As the Third Army pushed toward the liberation of Europe, Patton carried this lesson with him. He had found the needle that could pierce the enemy's mythical armor. Today, the dust of Troina has settled, but the truth remains. In the face of death, there is no master race, only the shared human craving for another breath, provided by the very hands they once sought to crush.
Thank you for watching. This was Mike, and this was War from Mike's Perspective. See you in the next video.